Frank, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Jamie. How are you? Good morning.
In a Take Charge First today, we welcome somebody from the world of electric boats. Frank Heidinger, the founder and CEO of HALEVAI, joins me. Frank's got a compelling story, a super interesting background, and a vision that I'm sure we can all get behind. HALEVAI's mission is very simple. It's to make boating easier and cleaner for everyone. So we talk about their boat and battery specifications, their target market, the nature of boating, and just how easily we can make it more efficient, cost-effective, and cleaner. So Frank shares some amazing stories, of course, their plans for the future as well. So we hope you enjoy. Let's get into it. Been excited for this episode to learn about HALEVAI and your story and the future for you. Let's start with your story, first of all, maybe your childhood and your journey up to this point, and what inspired you to found HALEVAI in 2020.
Yeah, so I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in the 80s. It was a turbulent time, and we were, obviously, I grew up on an island. People don't think of it often that way, but Brooklyn's part of an island called Long Island, right? It's made up of you have Nassau, Suffolk, Queens, and Brooklyn County, Kings County, and we're surrounded by water, but we don't really get in it. And when I started to experience beaches of Long Island, I thought as a child that maybe I'd be a marine biologist. And there was also so much pollution back then, so you couldn't necessarily access waterways and swim in them. And that was always a far-fetched dream. But when you grow up in a landlocked place like that, even though you're surrounded by water, you're kind of landlocked by tall buildings. I took a different path. I was a musician, and I played sports through high school. I went to City College, and I lived in New York City, and I kind of took a gear towards hospitality, and I worked for several, small but very, very famous restaurant groups. And then I moved to a very large restaurant group and spent a bunch of time out in Las Vegas and Los Angeles. And when I came back to New York, I was walking along Grand Street in Chinatown, and I saw in a specialty store a glass filled with shark fins. And this was back, I think, in 2012 or so. And I was feeling kind of unstoppable at that point. I was in my 30s. I was feeling really good. I was healthy. And it kind of like just knocked me back, because I thought, whoa, I was immediately transported back to when I was 9 or 10 years old, and I had so much passion about ocean and sharks and marine biology. And I thought, wow, my entire adult life has gone by, or at least to that date, my entire life had gone by. And I had done nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that for all I could say in the modern world of like, oh, but you were accomplished. And no, I wasn't. And I had done nothing, right? And so I kind of made it my goal was to eliminate shark fins in the state of New York. And I put together a small team, and I navigated those waters and figured out that it was mostly based in a lobbying effort. And so I funded a lobbying effort. And I created great partnerships with Humane Society and wildaid.org and other great organizations that had been trying to do it. The fundamental difference was that it was about 3 seats in state assembly, and those seats didn't want to touch it because they were in fishing communities. And even though this wasn't a topic of fishing, shark finning is a cruel practice that yields such a small return, and the rest of the fish is discarded. But because these districts were in fishing communities that were already kind of plundered by commercial fishing in the 80s, that there was a sensitivity there to any legislation dealing with fishing. And so we had to sort of navigate that. And then we also went to the shop owners and said, do you want this product? And they said, no, we don't want it, but if it's legal, we're going to inventory it. And so, well, what if you had a year to sell your inventory? They were like, that's more than enough time. And so those two shifts, getting those state assemblymen in those districts. And so that was a sense of accomplishment, but also felt like, okay, well, there's a win for the ocean. And there aren't many. You hear terrible news over the last 15 years about, reefs falling apart and biomass falling apart and large schooling fish there's just so many impacts that you could start a list. There's great movies like Seaspiracy that detail this type of thing, right? So I don't need to take up our time talking about it, but what I did get was a sense of, okay, I want to do more of this. And by the way, when this legislation was redrafted and it was voted for, both the state assembly in New York and the House voted 100% unanimously to pass this law. So there was no abstentions, there was no nays. The then governor Cuomo signed this into law later that year, and so we felt like, okay, let's take this momentum and let's try to bring it to the other states on the Eastern Seaboard. And we did. Maryland, Maine, Rhode Island, we kind of did. But I also felt like that wasn't necessarily where I wanted to spend my time in, like lobbying politicians to change one law about a product which doesn't really have a lot of scale in it, right? The scale impact, it's a must do. I think we don't need shark fins in our stores, but it doesn't change the net outcome of much in those states, right? So, but it was around that time that I met a gentleman who was founding Parlay for the Oceans, and I jumped on his team and was kind of first early days member of the team. And because I had production experience, and because I knew how to throw a party and take care of people in hospitality kind of way, it was a really nice fit because they were deriving new content. They had a really, really cool board of directors who, really cool participants like Paul Watson, for example, who, is the founder of Sea Shepherd and now has a new organization fighting the good fight in the open oceans. And as a result, there's a lot of star power there. And so we were getting really kind of high visibility events from day one. And the idea of plastic pollution wasn't necessarily a household topic yet. Maybe in Europe a little bit, they were a little bit better at recycling. We talk about recycling in this country. It's still 5%, I think, or less. It's a terrible practice. And that stuff, mismanaged, gets into waterways and really clogs the system. And so we thought, could we create value for this material? Is there a way to take something that is valueless and turn it into valuable? And the way you do that is through collaboration with big entities like sports teams, international brands, et cetera, et cetera. And so I spent a few years working with Parlay, building out not only the event side on production, but also on the supply side. Like, where could these materials go? What could new clients look like? What are the uses for nylon 6 and PET and all these other materials? And that took me to a point where, because we were having a material discussion on a regular basis in a global setting and looking at what are the new materials, we were mostly focused on what are the materials in the clothes we wear, in the cars we drive, in the furniture we make, these types of things, longer life cycle materials. So not just throwaway materials, but things that you keep for a few years, if not longer, because by doing so, if you take a bottle and you turn it into a shirt or team jersey, you're going to wear that for many years. So, but I really was interested in the topic of material, and electrification, as you know, had taken, the left lane, if you will, and just gone high speed. And so early mobility, micro mobility, cars, transport vans, it's all being done. And in the marine space, I was particularly interested because what I noticed is that we were going around the world, and all these partnerships we were forming where we were collecting plastic pollution, we're using these small gas boats. And, it's the same smell every time you get on board and you see the smoke and you go, we're finding a solution by creating another problem. Is there a solution to that problem? And is it even scalable? And at that point, I didn't really know the answers. I'm not an engineer by trade. I did a lot of mechanical work when I was in the early stage of my career, working for my father's company, which I kind of glassed over. So I knew how to read drawings. I worked with mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. I knew my way around a drawing. But I didn't know what thermal reduction looks like for, batteries on water. So we started to just put together a really same thing what we did with the shark. We put a small team together. The three people I'm thinking of today are still with the team. So they're the founding members still working with us. And we started to research and we started to look at what was out there in the marine industry. And what we found, I'm sure we'll cover later in this interview, but what we found was interesting. And that interest piqued us into forming a real company and hiring some high-level engineering and naval architects to really start this momentum and this movement.
So I guess we're up to maybe 2020 at this point. And before we get into it, what's the meaning of the word HALEVAI? I know there's some interesting meaning behind it.
Yeah, it's an old word, and it's Aramaic and Yiddish and Hebrew alike, but has no religious context. So it's really just a very optimistic word, which seeks to understand the way it will be, or the way it could be, if only it would be, if that makes sense. And so it's really a spirit. I often talk about when you're driving a car alone, or you're taking a shower, or you just like daydream for a moment, you see the future as if it was really there. It's sort of there's a lot of talk about this Joe Dispenza manifestation model, right, these days. But it's the idea that we can manifest the future by just simply thinking it through. And so HALEVAI kind of does that. It's this forward-looking vision, not knowing how you're going to get there necessarily, but knowing that you will. And it's very optimistic, and we really like it. And it also fundamentally translates directly into we will. And so we say we will simplify boating, we will harness renewable energy, and we will develop better materials. And so it was the perfect layup for us in our company to say, that is our standard, right? These are the three things we want to accomplish. And we thought about this a really long time ago. And the first one was, how are we going to simplify boating? Well, mechanically, these electrical systems are far more simple. There's fewer working parts, and you press a button and they work. So we simplify boating. And then we harness renewable energy, because our grid currently is around 13% in the United States and growing. That's what the COP21 goals set forth by the big 8 nations is that by 2050 we're carbon neutral. And so if we reach those goals as nations, that means that all the energy used to supply in these vehicles, whether it's used for institutional use, there's municipality functions, which we can talk about. There's also a recreational component, which is rather large, especially in countries like the US, which have tens and tens and tens of thousands of lakes, right? So there's a really big market. Recreational boating is growing every year, and renewability is growing every year. And so there's a natural move towards, hey, what if we could just incrementally change that? Well, over the next 30 or 40 years, all of this recreational stuff that happens under 30 feet, short ranges, which is the majority of the business, which is the majority of the industry. What if we were to just totally make that renewable? And we can. And then third is looking at what are the materials we're using today. They're not great. The process, supply chain, all of it. And so we know that that's not great. We accept it, but we say part of our time is going to develop resources that can look and test new materials that can replace the existing structures of how we make boats today. And that's a very long-term, lofty goal. That's 20, 30 years out. Supply chains take generations to shift. I often talk about Lycra being developed by DuPont in 1920s. And, it's pervasive now. We know it's in the material you and I are both wearing, most likely. I mean, you might be 100% cotton there. I'm not sure. But either way, I guarantee there's something in the room you're sitting in that has Lycra in it. And that the reason for that is that supply chain took 100 years to develop. Working out where you're going to make it, how you're going to supply it, where you're going to store it, how you're going to get it in the filaments of all these yarns and threads made in all these different countries, all around the world, all part of an international supply chain that will clothe us. This stuff takes a really, really long time. So we know that that's a lofty goal, but we set it out there and we said we're going to reach it.
Yeah, we'll get into the name of the the model 2050, kind of the reason for that and everything. Just to go back, you mentioned Joe Dispenza. Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know who he is, look him up, follow his work. He's doing some amazing things. So I just wanted to mention that. Give it a little bit of history on the electrification boats and where we stand today.
There seems to be a pattern that formed, which was to follow the Tesla model, which was to start the car model, was to start with high-end luxury vehicles that are powered by electric. And the challenge there is that one, automotive is developed differently than boats. So boats in our country today are mostly designed by the boat manufacturer, but the engine, the motors, I'm talking gas, all of the components, navigation, all of the low voltage harness materials, all the pumps, these are not made by the manufacturer. These are bought items that are assembled by the manufacturer. And essentially, boat manufacturers are experiential companies, right? It's a design aesthetic, it's an experience, and that's what you're buying. And so the materials on board are bought from one of the major companies, either it's Mercury, if you're talking iron boats, Arneson, like you're buying pre-made powertrain material to push that boat. So we were noticing that in the electric space in boating, what was happening is that a lot of these companies were trying to design every component themselves. They were trying to be like, follow the car model. And they were also going to a very, very high-end luxury market. Several $100,000, and I mean $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, 800,000 euros in some cases for some of these boats. And by the way, they're beautiful. They are beautiful, but their range is limited for a boat of that price, and they're small. And so for $1 million or 800,000 euros, you can get a really nice used boat. You can go. I mean, we're based here in South Florida. You can get a boat that can go out to the Bahamas. You can bring multiple people. You can live aboard, bathrooms, showers, bedrooms, And so to compare what you can get for $700,000 or $800,000 in the used boat market for a 24, 25-foot electric boat that goes 30 nautical miles. Now, as exhilarating as that may be, and for somebody, some super wealthy individual who just likes novelty items, that's a great buy. But that's not the way America buys boats. And so we were faced with the challenge of designing something for the masses. And by masses, I mean anywhere in the country where there's discretionary income to the extent that someone can make a $1,500 to $1,900 a month payment to finance a boat for recreation, that we wanted to be able to fit into that model, right? So we had to value engineer both the price of the boat, but also the performance. And so what we did was went for like the most high performance at the lowest price we could bring it to customers, and that's what we designed and developed.
And let's get into the model 2050. I know there's some variations of it. I'm going to run through some stats here that obviously on your website, the new website, which looks good. So top speed of 30 miles per hour, cruising speed of 20, 50 nautical mile range, 24 feet, 10-person capacity, and starting price of $185,000. So first of all, let's talk about who you're targeting. So who's your kind of target market and consumers with that price range and product?
Yeah, so our first year deliveries that are being manufactured now are going to go to places in South Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, all the way down to the Keys. We have a few clients out west in Southern California. So Newport is a really big market for us because boaters in Newport don't often go out the cut. In many cases, they stay within the Newport Marina, and there's a 5-mile-an-hour no wake zone in the entire marina. So for the efficiency of electric, it makes complete sense because one, at that speed, you have well over 50 nautical miles, right? And you can charge for really cheap. And so that's sort of how we're set up. Ideally, with scale, we'd like to break into the Midwest markets. I'd like to value engineer a model that doesn't quite have as much power and as much range as the initial offering. Our Model 2050 was kind of built off that. We chose the name Model 2050 because we were thinking about the COP21 Paris Agreement. I happened to be working with Parlay at the time, and I was president in COP21 and was there for these momentous meetings. And they kind of inspired me in a new way at that time. And wouldn't it be cool to just name the model after what our goal is? So where we're going towards, we're moving toward 2050 and a renewable future. What we ended up with was that a cruising speed of 20 miles an hour and a range of 50 nautical miles. That was a complete afterthought. That was another Yiddish word is kismet. Like we couldn't have thought that one up. It was just by luck and chance that we kind of hit it off with those numbers. So yeah, those numbers are correct. Our market is anywhere you can get on the water, really. And we're focused on the U.S. We're built in the U.S. We're engineered in the U.S. We're designed in the U.S. and manufactured in the U.S. And I do think we have hopes to be in Europe at some point. But there is just such a big market in the U.S. So the idea for us would be to start with this version, which is pretty high performance. When you compare it to and a pretty low cost, considering what you're really getting. It's a lot of boat and a lot of power for that size boat. And there's also a lot of room to move around. That's another thing. We designed our deck. We designed our hull based off of the conditional flow dynamics. So that means is to push a boat over water takes a tremendous amount of force. And the thing about horsepower is it's kind of cheap these days. So traditional gas horsepower engines, like they have so much power that there's a bit of naval architecture was taken out of the conversation. So you could essentially design, I mentioned boats are essentially experiential. And so boat designers will design the hull of choice. Not to say that they disregard naval architecture, they don't. But you can kind of make a shape that's not the best for cutting through water. But if you overpower it, it will move. And there's so much power available at such a cheap price. Now, gas is not cheap, but the price per horsepower is relatively competitive. In fact, if you go to any boat show, the first thing you see when you walk into any boat show are the 4 stacks of 600 horsepower Mercury outdrives or and you look at what that would cost and you go, wow, that's relatively inexpensive for the amount of power you get, because you can just overpower whatever there is. With electric, you can't do that. And so with electric, you have to look at how can I make the hull the most efficient possible? And traditional V hulls, deep Vs, are not the most efficient. And so what we had to do was look at a range of hull styles and hull types and say, what is the most efficient hull type? And so that was the first differentiating factor. So we didn't start with a boat and then power it with electric. We started with the idea of what's the most efficient hull? And we had this trimaran semi-planing hull being the most efficient. So then we built the power over that. And with that, we were able to open up our deck and have somewhat more of a deck boat. So it's kind of a hybrid center console deck boat, which means that your carrying capacity can be higher, which means you can really seat 10 people. Now, I think I've had 9 people on the boat a few times and it operates fine. And it's fairly comfortable, believe it or not. For a 24-foot boat, 9 people's a lot. We can do it. We're Coast Guard rated to that. We were the first electric to get Coast Guard certification, and our Coast Guard manufacturing letters, and it's approved for 10 humans to be on board. So yeah, that's the overall spec of the boat.
Nice. You mentioned hopefully one day it'll be available in Europe. I live in Barcelona by the sea, and obviously see a lot of boats going past. And I believe it's the America's Cup in September. Kind of big, obviously big boat race. There's a big countdown. I run past it every couple of days. I think we're down to about 85 days now. Yeah, I mean, just seeing that, and I was out on a boat a couple of weeks ago, and yeah, I mean, there's so much potential and scope for that across the world, where, as you say, kind of 50 nautical miles is plenty, depending on what you need it for. For what we did, it was, we're out for an hour and a half. And
Yeah, the use case for it is, again, the first thing you typically deal with when you present this is people propose scenarios that don't match your model. And well, what if I want to do and I said that's not where the industry is at this particular moment. But 90% of recreational boating is in the category of exactly the metrics we built towards, right? So we were not looking at the 10% outliers, offshore fishermen and people who want to go 100 nautical miles in a day, or people who want to run to Bimini and back in a day. And it's perfectly doable and it's a nice day out. But that's not the way 90% of people use their boats in this country, under 30 feet, around $200,000, or less for their boat price. Those boats are being used for 10 to 15 to 20 nautical miles a day max. They're doing what you just mentioned. They're meeting at the dock. They're going through a wake zone. They're maybe making it out into the open water, whatever that is, a bay, a river, an estuary, a reservoir, lakes and things of this nature. They're maybe pulling a tube with some kids. They're going on anchor. They're swimming. They're having lunch. They're drinking. And then they go home. And our boat charges overnight, both on 110 or 240. So you never really have to fill it up with fuel. You just bring it. If you're trailering your boat, you can just plug it into the garage where you park. If you do have a dock with shore power, you just plug it to shore power, and you set it and kind of forget it. And it's a really, really simple way of refueling, and at a very low cost. The electric in the United States ranges from 8 to 11 cents per kilowatt hour. We have a 100 kilowatt hour battery pack. So you do the math on that, it's between $8 and $11 to get between 30 and 50 nautical miles in range, depending on how you drive your boat. And so if we think about that in the gas equivalent, let's say a 250 horsepower, 275 horsepower outboard, if you're doing 30 to 50 nautical miles, you get like 3 miles to the gallon, right? So, if you think about what that is, about 10 or 12 gallons of gasoline to do that range at speed. The gas is $6-7 at some marinas now. It's at least 6. In most places it's 7, especially in South Florida. So it's $70-80 minimum. Could be more depending on what kind of fuel you're using or where you're buying it. So you compare $80 to $8 and compound that over the use of 36 or 52 week cycle. If you're in places like Georgia, for example, you get 36 weeks of summer, of like good weather to boat in. If you're down in Florida, it's year round. And where this really makes a big impact is with the municipalities. So a lot of agencies in the US where they're not directly governmental, they're non-governmental organizations that are given rights by government to police a community. So for example, where I live, there's always 2 cops, we call them cops, but they're really private hire police to protect the community around Indian Creek, right? It's been getting a lot of press lately, Indian Creek, because a lot of big names have been buying, Tom Brady and Jeff Bezos. And so they have this affluent community on the water, and they have their own police force, basically. And these guys sit on idle, and they go at 5 knots, and they just go around the island all day long. And I started to do calculations and said, well, how much gas do you use in a day? And they go, because we got to know them. They love the boat. They see us in the area. We were always doing demos. And they said, how much gas do you use a day? And they would tell us, and we go, wow, they're spending between $35 and $50 a day for 12 hours, right? And there's always a boat out there. So 24 hours a day. So there's 2 12-hour shifts. They're spending between $70 and $100 a day every day of the year. Now, I understand this is an affluent community. Policing them is important. It comes at a cost. But think about sitting on idle with our boat. It would cost about $1 a day, maybe $2 a day to do the exact same enforcement that they're doing currently. And I'm sure that community would hear that and say, wow, what is the investment that I have to make to buy one of these boats to then over the perpetuity of its lifespan? And again, these batteries will last 10, 15 years because they're not running these things at high speed. Occasionally they get a call Maybe something comes overboard on a boat and they need to help get it out of the water, or there's someone in distress and they get a call. And so they hit the throttle and they go there quickly. In most cases, they're just circling the island, keeping an eye out for drone operators and people who are getting too close to the property. Like, this is what they're doing. There are communities throughout the United States that are doing the exact same kind of police work and enforcement. And if you compound those costs, I'm not even talking about right now carbon reduction or mitigation, right? We're just talking about operating costs, because it's a big part of the equation is to talk about what it costs to run these things. It's an enormous number. And so we see the future there. Recreation is rather small, but municipality, National Park Service, there's so many use applications for what we call our ERV, which is we call it a research vessel, but it's really a deck plan that's designed for more of an institutional use rather than a recreational use. You can see it on our website. It's there. And we're going into production later this year with our first model of that. So we should have our ERV in the water by end of year, start of next year.
You keep answering questions before I've asked them. It was going to be kind of municipalities, and I know you have some focus on scientific research and things. I guess so in terms of target markets, talking about recreational, that stems from your hospitality background and being able to throw a good party. And then on the flip side, doing your work with Parlay, good work, really important work, but ultimately it's costing the earth when it doesn't need to. So same with that, and obviously policing and things. There's a huge opportunity there to make big differences quickly as well. You and I talked about before recording how long things take to get into supply chain and consumer adoption and things. But yeah, I think there's huge wins to be had here. And just talking about consumer adoption, do you think the boating industry will benefit from the kind of resurgence of EVs over recent years? Do you think that consumers will be more on board with an electric boat?
What I've noticed is that hardcore boat people typically are a little bit slow to adopt. They're set in their ways. They have standards, and I understand when you're a captain and systems work a certain way and things sound a certain way, and you have the responsibility of keeping the safety of members on board, and you want to hear and feel. You want something you're familiar with. It is true, but we also find that when people do start operating, they realize how similar it is. The sounds are a little bit different. The stability is a little bit different because of our hull. But what we also notice is that for a wide range of people who don't necessarily feel confident operating boats, that's where we get a big buy-in. Talk about the equivalent is, I have a friend of mine who lives in New York. She's a brilliant climate scientist. And for years, she never owned a car. And, and she did well. She could have very easily owned a car. And she said, no, I don't feel right about it. I don't want to own a car. I don't want a car. And then 3 years ago, she bought a Tesla. And she's like, oh, it's great having a car. I get to go to the country on the weekends. And and I was like, well, yeah, that's what the rest of us have been doing for the last 20 years. And she's like, yeah, I just didn't want to have a grass car. And there's so many people that step on board and go, I would never buy a boat, but I'd buy this boat. This is cool. Like, it's more approachable. I also find that like moms feel a little bit more comfortable with their kids on it. It's because it's different. It doesn't jolt. It doesn't shake. The things that make traditional small watercraft maybe unapproachable for some people don't exist here. And so we also see there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I have a buyer. We're building a custom boat for him. Well, he asks for some custom things that are not part of the standard build, and we're going to meet the challenge and build it for him. But he and his wife, they live down in the southern part of the Keys, and he's like, well, I didn't think I'd ever buy a boat because my wife doesn't want me to, like, she doesn't think it's good. he worked in environmental impact for most of his life, and they live on the water. And they're like, we really wanted, we were just kind of missing out on that slice of life because we just couldn't fathom a gas boat, and it's always, things are always going wrong, and it's very expensive to fuel it. And we didn't like the fact that what it was. He goes, but then I saw your model, and I was like, this is great. So there's a lot of folks who are on the water. There's also folks who own bigger gas boats. For example, in affluent communities, that they have these bigger ocean-going boats, but they don't want to power those up just to take the kids out for a spin. They don't want to spend $300, $400, $500 in an afternoon just to go out and get a fun day on the water. And so for those types of clients, it makes a lot of sense as well. So, we have a few customers in the South Florida region who are like, this is great. I have my regular boat at the dock. I have a 40-foot catamaran with 400 horsepower outboards. And if I need to run it out to the Bahamas, or if I do an offshore fishing next, fine, great. But when the kids are antsy and they just want to go pull the tube, we have this marketing slogan called plug in, pull out, right? Because it's just that easy, right? Get back to the dock, you plug it in, you're ready to go, you just pull it out and you're in the water, and it's a low cost, you charge off a short power, you don't have to think much of it. So we're seeing a lot of adoption from places we didn't initially think it would be, which is, like a second boat owner, or a first-time boat owner that never thought to own a boat before, but now they like the technology and they like the approachability and they like the ease of operation. And so they've now said, oh, I'm actually ready to get in the game.
Nice. Yeah. So tapping into new markets who were previously put off by owning a gas boat and, now on board with it. Interesting.
There's even lakes that are, that are no gas lakes. And it's an interesting conversation to be having, because I don't think those lakes ever thought there would be such high performance in electric. So now they have to start thinking about, what is permitted and what's not. But it's a cleaner way to be on the water for sure.
And then talk us through your status with manufacturing, how you plan to scale it, and make the whole manufacturing process more sustainable over time.
So we've kind of brought manufacturing to segments of the country. So we are building 3 main manufacturing partnerships in 3 different parts of the country. And the reason we do that is because we want to be closer to where the end customer is going to receive the boats. We can also run some serviceability out of that facility. And then we're also working with a beautiful craftsman up in Maine to build our tooling, which will be the tooling that gets used to make all of the parts in these various parts of the country. And so as demand grows, we will probably reach a saturation point with each manufacturing facility, and we'll either need to expand that relationship or find another solution in those areas, to which there are many. So really, the beauty of this country is that there is no limits to scale if there's demand. There in other places you just say, well, there's no supply chain, or there's the taxes are too high, or you can't get banking and finance. We have in this country, we're very lucky to have institutional ability to scale. We are built to build businesses, both for good and otherwise. And so if you have demand in the US, you will be able to find scale.
It's super exciting. I mean, there's, you've brought forward so many justifications as to why this product solution is needed, for recreation, for policing, for research. So yeah, I'm really hoping that it takes off. In terms of the journey ahead, what do you see as being your biggest challenges? The ones that you'll have to overcome to scale and kind of really get this out there.
Yeah, I mean the biggest challenge is staying with the technology. So battery technology is moving at a lightning fast pace. which we tend to talk about in terms of space claim. So for us, one of the biggest factors of power of this nature is the amount of weight it adds to the overall build. We offer 75 and 100 kilowatt hour packs. They weigh between 800 and 1,200 pounds, depending on which one we choose. And that's a lot of weight to add to a boat. So we have to think about how in 5 years from now, or maybe even less, that same weight, that same space claim will get you 200 kilowatt hours, right? Which means you've now not increased weight, but you've extended range by 2x. And we can see that incrementally happening. So one of the challenges we're facing is how do we let customers who are early adopters find a way to essentially trade back and refinance if they want to repower in a few years, because it's only fair. And this is happening in automotive as well, where you can get credit back, and this is where governments will be helpful in finding ways to grow these industries. Is if you get credits back for system, it's removed, it's recycled, it's put back into a supply chain, which is very clean. There's nothing wasted there. At the same time, you're repowering and getting new technology constantly on your boat. And so now you can say, I was an early adopter. Yes, I have to refinance every 5 years, but there's credits and there's programs you can use to kind of redo this. And I get to stay on the cusp of the technology. The other thing is to find a solution for lower range use capabilities. So we built towards this range that we mentioned earlier, and it's a 24-foot boat. And although 24-foot boat is not a big boat, it's a lot of boat. And it's probably more boat than a lot of recreational users need. And so figuring out what is the perfect balance for, is it 20 foot? Is it 18 feet? Is it a 12 nautical mile range? Is it going to a super low performance motor package, which I don't really like, which would get a sticker price, which is significantly lower, but you'd have a max speed of 7 knots. And that's sort of not our model. The idea for us is to be always on the power side of things. You may not need it, but if you want it, it's there. And it's kind of exhilarating and fun to see how electric power, the torque of electric power works. And it's pretty fun. So figuring out where does the challenge is that the market's going to determine what they want. We are building the experience, but the ranges are not known. We know now what the actual recreational range is. We know how many people typically go out on a boat, right? And so we're working now to build another model, which will be kind of a dialed down version, not so much on power, but just on the overall weight. Also trailering, 24-foot boat, 5,000 pounds or 4,800 pounds. You need at least a class 1 towing, like an F-150 minimum. The book would say, it's around 6,000, and that's up to 6,000 pounds. So thinking about trailering, if folks are trailering these, they shouldn't have to go out and get a new car just so they can trailer their boat. They want to be able to trailer their car with their existing SUV. And so if we can get the weight down to 3,000 pounds, 3,500 pounds, and we can get the size down to a smaller trailer, it's easy to store. You don't need the battery capacity of the long range because you don't go that far and you still get the speed. So it's really going to be about determining what do those next few models look like. And that's exciting, right? Because the more you travel around the country and the more you look at data, the more you talk to folks, they all tell you what they want. And then we get to build that for them. And so that's what I think the future holds, is looking at how do we best diversify what we have and make it usable and approachable and within a price. That's the thing. Our goal, company internally, is that we want to, by 2026, we want to offer a version of this boat, which is sort of tighter package and that you can get into for around $1,000 a month financing, right? And for us, that means that it's a that's a decision you could make at Sam's Club. If you know what I'm referring to, right? The pack stores, you could walk into a Costco or a Sam's Club and you could go, get pre-approved now. And you see that thing and you go, oh yeah, I'm doing it. Honey, what do you think? And then she goes, It's electric, it's quiet, it's safe, it's it. And you go, okay, cool. And you just fill out your credit app. And then a few weeks later, or that day, you can just drive away with your boat. That I see as a really cool feature for what we are able to do with this technology over the next few years.
Nice. I think you just wrote a storyboard on how that advert's going to play out. So a good one to go with. No, I think it's really exciting, and you've had a very, very busy time since 2020 and founding the business, and it sounds like you're kind of only just getting started. So good luck for the future, and obviously kind of 2050 is quite some time away, but
it's going to happen fast, and that's the beauty. I mean, just seeing the technology change in the last few years since we started developing these systems, we're really bullish on the optimism of what the future holds for these technologies. And again, we built a unique experience. There's going to be plenty others that come along. We like to think that our deck plan makes the most sense for recreation and for these institutional applications. But yeah, it's quite exciting.
Well, a couple of final questions before we finish. As a business founder, recent business founder since 2020, what are the biggest lessons, or maybe the biggest lesson you've learned? And is there anything that you do differently?
There's always something you do. There's always a thousand things you would do differently. But the truth be told, you can't. And so it's about putting a really good team together. Really looking at what's available at that moment, because remember this development happened at a wild time. We were part of it was in a COVID lockdown, then there was a reopening, then there was supply chain issues, then there was an economic. We've had an interesting geopolitical climate. I won't mention both nationally and internationally. There's been some wild things happening there which affect supply chain, and so we were constantly hit with, well, there's supply chain slowdown there, and it's all okay. The beauty of it is that if you sit down with a good team of people, and you hire the best minds that you can afford at that time, and then you make the best critical decisions one after another, what you end up with is an accumulation of really good decisions, and you end up with a good product. Once you have any product, you look at it and you say, oh, well, that could have been softened, or we could have tried this. And none of it really relates to safety. It's more aesthetics. I was watching I was walking around the house, and there was a TV show on from the 90s, and I noticed that the Apple logo was upside down on the back of the screen, and it made me kind of chuckle a little bit, because it said, "There's the monster Apple," and they didn't get it right on that version. They thought users would look at their screen and see the Apple logo when the computer was closed, but the reality is the computer's mostly open. And so it's the person sitting at the other table that needs to see the logo. And so they turned it, 180 degrees. So it makes me go, there's so many of those moments you have when you build anything where you go, it's like the Homer Simpson, dough, like, what? And it seems so apparent at the time, right? When it's hindsight's 2020, and you go, well, that would have made a lot of sense if we did that. I make a joke about, if you see some of the videos on Reels online, you'll see like there's a little splash off the port side on the swim platform. I put in a beautiful open-sided swim ladder, which is very easy to install. It's very stable. Kids can come up with flippers, but it was mounted to the external part of the swim platform. And so when you hit a little bit of chop, it sprays. Now, that's already a changed part. It's a design flaw, right? I made a decision to put a really high quality swim ladder in that was really easy to take in and take out. I thought that was a really cool user experience. The result is it kicks water. So now we've had to change the mold of the swim platform, and we're actually embedding that part so it's a flush surface. So there's hundreds and hundreds of these things, right? But none of it really matters, because the big stuff is what really counts. The engineering, the safety, the protocols, the overall operation of the machine is stellar. And that's what ultimately the guests will see.
And of course, what you stand for, what HALEVAI means, the reason you founded the business, it's super, super exciting. And when, we first got in touch and, talking about you coming on the show, was really keen to, get your story out there and, get the business out there. So yeah,
I appreciate that.
Good luck for the future. Final question before I let you go. It's from a previous guest. Obviously, you don't know what the question is. And it's not from the previous episode, so you can't guess who it is. But I think it's a nice question. They ask, what does taking charge mean to you?
What does taking charge mean to me? I think it's a lot of what I just explained, which is about like the assembly of who you work with, right? It's the strategic decisions that you either keep or don't keep certain people on the committee, constantly being able to evolve and make the best possible decisions with the best group of people. So, we've started to accrue a really robust team that is made up of private investors who are expert offshoremen, captains themselves in their own right, custom built numerous boats, have years and years and years of experience of being at sea. Never powered an electric vessel, but have a certain acumen. My core business partner, Brian, comes from a strategic condiments business. So a food packaging business and condiments business was the largest or fully organic salad dressing and condiments company in the country. Nationwide, Whole Foods, Sam's Club, you name it, they're there, right? So his viewpoint is different than mine because of his experience. So taking charge is really about understanding what you don't know and sitting down with the people who really do, hearing them, and being able to make good, positive decisions and then stick to it. So when you say you're going to do something, just do it. Meet the deadline. And again, sometimes meeting the deadline means, we could make this small change, but that's okay because you're persevering. We could have waited for the material to be perfect, but then we wouldn't have a prototype sitting in Florida and another several being built, and we wouldn't have customers queuing up to buy a product for delivery in 2025. So taking charge is, I think, about team building, and knowing when to expand your team and listen to them and follow through on what you guys agree to.
And from my side, thank you for ultimately taking a risk. And, I guess walking past that store in 2012 and kind of looking back at kind of what really drives you, what you're passionate about, and taking charge of issues that, are super present and, super important to our future. So, thank you for taking charge today. Thank you for taking charge of these issues and good luck for the future. I look forward to receiving the delivery of my HALEVAI 2050 in a couple of years.
Yeah, well, we'll be in the EU. So it's interesting. So our batteries, our battery systems are certified for use in the EU. However, the EU regulation makes you go through this really robust approvals process. So it's so that, like, from a design perspective, they meet all the criteria, but we just haven't gone through the entire process yet. So as soon as that process has been gone through, we'll be there.
I'll be watching the news for that. But no, Frank, thank you very much. Thanks for coming on today, and good luck for everything in the near future.
No, thanks again, Jerry. I appreciate it.